Marcus Chen sat in the flickering fluorescent light of the hospital waiting room, his phone clutched in trembling hands. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with his own fear sweat as he scrolled through his contact list for the third time. His daughter Emma lay somewhere behind those imposing double doors, fighting for her life after the car accident. The doctor said she needed surgery immediately, but his insurance had lapsed 2 weeks ago when he lost his job. The bill would be devastating. He needed $15,000 by morning, or they would transfer her to a county facility where the wait times could prove fatal. He called his brother first. David had always been the successful one, the one who made it big in real estate. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Marcus tried again. This time David answered, but his voice was cold and distant. He claimed he was tied up in investments, that his cash flow was terrible right now, that maybe next month things would be different. Marcus heard a television playing in the background, heard laughter. His brother was watching a game while his niece fought for her life. The conversation lasted 90 seconds before David said he had to go and hung up. His sister Rebecca came next. She worked as a bank manager, pulled in a solid income, owned her home outright. Surely she would understand. Surely blood meant something. But Rebecca's response cut even deeper than David's rejection. She lectured him about responsibility, about how she had warned him to keep up with his insurance payments, about how she couldn't enable his poor financial decisions. She actually used that word, enable. As if saving his dying daughter was somehow rewarding bad behavior. Marcus felt something break inside him during that call, some fundamental belief in family that he had carried since childhood. He worked through his contact list methodically, desperately. His cousin James claimed he was saving for his son's college fund and couldn't possibly dip into it. His uncle Richard said he had just put money into renovating his kitchen and the timing was terrible. His childhood friend Mike, who Marcus had lent $3,000 to just last year, suddenly couldn't remember that loan and said his wife controlled their finances anyway. Each rejection landed like a physical blow, each excuse another confirmation that he was utterly alone in this nightmare. The waiting room clock showed 9:15. Marcus had been making calls for over an hour. His throat was raw from pleading, from explaining, from trying to make people understand that Emma was only 7 years old, that she loved painting and told terrible knock-knock jokes and wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. None of it mattered. People he had known his entire life, people he had helped move apartments and supported through divorces and celebrated birthdays with, all of them found reasons why they couldn't help now. Marcus put his phone down and buried his face in his hands. The waiting room was nearly empty now, just an elderly couple in the corner and a young man reading a magazine. He thought about his late wife, Sarah, who had died from cancer 3 years ago. She would have known what to do. She always knew what to do. But she was gone, and he was alone, and his daughter was dying, and apparently family meant nothing when it really counted. A nurse appeared through the double doors and called his name. Marcus stood on shaking legs, preparing himself for the worst. The nurse's expression was grave as she approached. She explained that Emma's condition had stabilized temporarily, but they needed to operate within the next few hours. The surgeon was ready. The operating room was available. Everything was prepared except for the financial clearance. Without it, they would have to arrange the transfer to county. The nurse didn't need to say what that meant. They both knew that the delay could cost Emma everything. Marcus nodded numbly and returned to his plastic chair. He had exhausted every option he could think of. His credit cards were maxed out. He had no assets to sell quickly enough. He had called everyone he knew. The walls of the waiting room seemed to close in around him as despair settled over his shoulders like a heavy coat. His phone sat silent in his lap, a useless piece of technology that had only brought him rejection and heartbreak tonight. He closed his eyes and tried to pray, though he wasn't sure he believed anyone was listening anymore. Marcus wasn't sure how long he sat there with his eyes closed, trying to breathe through the panic that squeezed his chest like a vice. Time had become fluid and meaningless in this place where life and death hung in balance. When he finally opened his eyes again, he noticed a young man from across the room standing nearby. Marcus hadn't heard him approach. The stranger was maybe 30 years old, wearing worn jeans and a faded jacket, holding a paper coffee cup in each hand. "You look like you could use this," the stranger said, extending one of the cups toward Marcus. His voice was gentle, without pity, which Marcus appreciated. He had received enough pitying looks tonight to last a lifetime. Marcus hesitated, then accepted the coffee with a mumbled thanks. The stranger sat down in the chair beside him, leaving one empty seat between them for courtesy. They sat in silence for a few moments. Marcus sipped the coffee and found it was actually good, far better than the sludge from the vending machine he had been choking down all evening. The warmth of the cup in his hands felt grounding, pulling him back from the edge of despair he had been teetering on. He glanced at the stranger, who was staring at the double doors with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. It was focused and distant at the same time, as if he were looking at something beyond the physical doors themselves. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your calls earlier," the stranger said finally. His tone was careful, not intrusive, but matter-of-fact. "Your daughter needs surgery." It wasn't a question. Marcus felt his defenses rising automatically. He didn't need another person telling him what he already knew, didn't need another lecture about responsibility or poor planning or any of the other judgments that had been heaped on him tonight. But the stranger continued before Marcus could respond. "My name is David Nguyen. I'm a contractor, nothing special. But I was here 4 years ago, in a situation similar to yours. My son had meningitis. The bills were astronomical. My insurance had denied the claim on some technicality. I was sitting in this exact waiting room, making the same calls you just made, getting the same responses." His voice was steady, but Marcus heard the old pain underneath it, like a scar that had healed but never quite stopped aching. Marcus turned to look at David properly now. The man's face was ordinary, the kind you would pass on the street without a second glance. But his eyes held a depth of understanding that Marcus hadn't seen in anyone else tonight. "What happened?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was almost afraid to hear the answer, afraid this story ended the way he feared his own might end. "A stranger helped me," David said simply. "A woman I had never met before. She was visiting her own mother in this hospital, and she heard me on the phone, heard me begging. She didn't know me from anyone. She had no reason to care. But she paid for my son's treatment. All of it. $37,000. David paused, letting the enormity of that sink in. "She saved my son's life, and then she walked away. I tried to find her afterwards to pay her back, to thank her properly, but she had left no contact information. The hospital couldn't give me her details because of privacy laws. She just vanished." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes, though he couldn't have said if they were from hope or despair or simply exhaustion. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. The question came out harsher than he intended, tinged with bitterness. He had been disappointed too many times tonight to allow himself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope could destroy you. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He held it for a moment, staring at it with that same distant expression. "Before she left, that woman said something to me. She said that kindness isn't a loan. It's not something you pay back to the person who gave it to you. It's something you pass forward when you have the chance. She said that maybe someday I would find myself in a position to help someone else, and when that day came, I should remember how it felt to be saved by a stranger." He extended the envelope toward Marcus. "I couldn't find her to pay her back. But I built my business back up. I worked hard. I saved. And I've been waiting for 4 years to find someone who needed help the way I needed it that night. I've been waiting to pass forward what was given to me." The envelope hung in the air between them, an offering that seemed too good to be true, too perfect to be real. Marcus stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. His mind was spinning, trying to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of trick, some scam, some cruel joke played by a universe that seemed determined to break him completely tonight. People didn't just give money to strangers. Family didn't even give money to family, as he had learned so painfully over the past few hours. Why would a complete stranger offer what his own blood had refused? "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm a good person or if I deserve help or if I'll just waste this money. You don't know anything about me." He was giving David reasons to take back the offer, he realized. He was so conditioned to rejection that he was rejecting himself now, doing the work for this stranger who had shown him more kindness in 5 minutes than his family had shown in hours. David smiled, and it was sad and knowing and infinitely kind. "The woman who helped me didn't know any of those things about me either. And you know what? It didn't matter. Your daughter is in there fighting for her life. That's all I need to know. That's all that matters right now." He pressed the envelope into Marcus's hands. "There's $18,000 in here. Cash. It's enough for the surgery and whatever else Emma might need. Take it. Use it. Save your daughter." Marcus opened the envelope with shaking hands, barely believing what he was seeing. The bills were real, crisp and substantial, bundled neatly with paper bands. $18,000. More than enough. More than he had dared to hope for during his darkest moment. He looked up at David, trying to find words adequate to express what he was feeling, but his vocabulary had been stripped down to its bare essentials by shock and gratitude and disbelief. "I will pay you back," Marcus managed to say, though even as the words left his mouth, David was shaking his head. "I don't know when, but I swear I will find a way. I'll get another job, I'll work 3 jobs if I have to, but I will pay back every single dollar. I'll write down my information, my address, my phone number, everything you need to find me." He was babbling now, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush to make David understand that he wasn't a charity case, that he would honor this debt. But David held up a hand, stopping him. "You're not listening to what I said before. This isn't a loan. I'm not your bank. I don't want your money, not now and not later. What I want is something different. What I need from you is a promise of a different kind." He leaned forward, his expression intense and serious. "Someday, when your life is stable again, when you've gotten back on your feet and you have more than you need, I want you to find someone else who's sitting in a waiting room like this. Someone who's desperate and alone and has run out of options. And I want you to help them the way I'm helping you now." The simplicity of it was staggering. Marcus had been prepared to sign promissory notes, to agree to payment plans, to mortgage his future for his daughter's life. Instead, he was being asked only to be kind to someone else someday. The asymmetry of the exchange felt wrong to him, felt like he was getting away with something, taking advantage of generosity that he hadn't earned. "That's not equal," he protested weakly. "What you're giving me is so much more than what you're asking." "Is it?" David asked. "That woman gave me much more than money. She gave me my son's life. She gave me hope when I had none. She showed me that the world isn't as cold and cruel as it sometimes seems. She taught me that strangers can be more family than family sometimes. You can't put a price on those things, Marcus. You can't repay them in dollars and cents. You can only pass them forward." A nurse walked by, her footsteps echoing in the quiet waiting room. The clock on the wall showed 10:45. Marcus had been in this hospital for nearly 4 hours now, 4 hours that had felt like an eternity. He thought about Emma, about how she had looked that morning before school, braiding her hair in front of the bathroom mirror and singing off-key to whatever song was playing in her head. He thought about how fragile life was, how quickly everything could change. One moment you're singing and braiding hair, and the next you're fighting for your life on an operating table. "I'll do it," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "I promise you, I will find someone to help. I will pass this forward. I swear it on my daughter's life." The oath felt sacred as he spoke it, binding him to something larger than himself. He was entering into a covenant with this stranger, joining a chain of kindness that stretched backward to the woman who had saved David's son and would stretch forward to whomever Marcus would eventually help. David nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's all I need. Now go. Take that money to the billing office. Get your daughter into surgery. Everything else can wait." He stood up, preparing to leave, and Marcus suddenly realized he might never see this man again. David was going to walk out of this hospital and disappear just like the woman who had helped him, becoming a mystery and a blessing and a story that Marcus would tell for the rest of his life. "Wait," Marcus said, standing as well. "At least tell me where you work, how I can contact you if I need to. What if there are complications? What if 18,000 isn't enough? What if I need help again?" He hated how desperate he sounded, hated that he was already imagining scenarios where this miracle wouldn't be enough, but fear made him practical in ways that gratitude couldn't override. "If it's not enough, you'll figure it out," David said with quiet confidence. "You're stronger than you think you are, Marcus. You're sitting here broken and defeated right now, but you haven't given up. You haven't walked away. You're still fighting for your daughter. That takes strength. Trust yourself to handle whatever comes next." He reached out and squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "But for what it's worth, I'll be checking the news. I'll be watching to see how this turns out. I believe Emma is going to be fine." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face now, no longer trying to hold them back. He had cried more tonight than he had since Sarah's funeral, but these tears were different. They were tears of relief and overwhelming gratitude and something else he couldn't quite name. It felt like being seen, truly seen, by another human being who understood exactly what he was going through. It felt like being caught just before hitting the ground, like being pulled back from an edge he had been certain he would fall over. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. The words were inadequate, pathetically small compared to what he was feeling, but they were all he had. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He would have said it 1,000 more times if he could, would have shouted it from the hospital rooftop, would have carved it into stone if that would somehow convey the depth of his gratitude. David smiled that sad, knowing smile again. Don't thank me. Thank the woman who started this chain. And then make sure the chain doesn't end with you. That's how you thank me. That's how you honor what's happening here tonight. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps confident and unhurried. Marcus watched him go, watched him push through the glass doors and disappear into the night. He thought about running after him, about getting more information, about making absolutely certain he could find this man again. But something stopped him. He understood now that David's anonymity was part of the gift. It freed Marcus from the burden of repayment, from the ongoing debt that would have colored every interaction between them. David was choosing to be a mystery, choosing to be a story, choosing to be an act of grace rather than a person owed money. Marcus stood in the waiting room for another moment, the envelope clutched against his chest like a talisman. Then he moved, his legs suddenly working again after being paralyzed by despair for so long. He practically ran to the billing office, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The woman behind the desk looked up in surprise as he burst through the door, breathless and wild-eyed. She probably thought he was going to cause trouble. People in hospitals sometimes snapped under the pressure, their grief and fear exploding into anger directed at whoever was nearest. But Marcus wasn't angry. He placed the envelope on the counter with shaking hands and explained that he had the money for Emma's surgery. The billing clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia according to her name tag, opened the envelope and began counting the bills. Her expression remained professional and neutral as she worked through the stack, but Marcus saw her eyebrows rise slightly when she reached the full amount. She asked for his identification, typed information into her computer, printed forms for him to sign. The bureaucracy of it all felt surreal after the emotional intensity of the past hour. Marcus signed his name over and over, initialing boxes and dating lines, agreeing to terms and conditions he barely read. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that Patricia was nodding, was stamping documents, was picking up her phone to call someone. "We have financial clearance for Emma Chen's surgery," she said into the receiver. "You can proceed whenever the surgeon is ready." Those words released something in Marcus's chest that had been clenched tight since the moment he got the call about the accident. Emma was going to get her surgery. She was going to have her chance. Whatever happened now, at least he had given her that chance. He hadn't failed her. He had found a way, or rather, a way had been given to him. Patricia handed him a receipt and told him to return to the waiting room. Someone would update him as soon as the surgery began. Marcus walked back through the corridor in a daze. The hospital looked different now, less threatening, less like a prison of fluorescence and despair. The same nurses walked the same paths, the same machines beeped and hummed, but Marcus saw it all through new eyes. He thought about David Nguyen, wondering where he was now, what he was doing. Was he driving home? Was he thinking about his own son? Was he feeling the same sense of purpose and completion that Marcus imagined he would feel someday when he passed this gift forward to someone else? The waiting room was emptier than before. The elderly couple had gone. A new family had arrived, clustered together near the vending machines, speaking in rapid Spanish. Marcus returned to his plastic chair and realized his phone had several missed calls. He scrolled through them without much interest. His brother David had called back twice, probably feeling guilty. His sister Rebecca had sent a text message asking if everything was okay, if he had figured something out. Marcus deleted the text without responding. They had shown him who they were tonight. He would remember. At 11:30, a nurse came to tell him that Emma was being prepped for surgery. The operation would take approximately 3 hours. The surgeon was Dr. Jennifer Patel, one of the best pediatric surgeons in the state. Marcus should try to rest, should eat something if he could. The nurse's kindness was genuine but routine. She dealt with terrified parents every day. She had learned to be compassionate without being overwhelmed by the constant tide of fear and hope that flowed through this place. Marcus couldn't eat. His stomach was tied in knots despite the relief of knowing Emma was finally getting help. He tried to read a magazine but couldn't focus on the words. He tried to watch the television mounted in the corner, but the images washed over him without meaning. Instead, he found himself thinking about the past, about the series of choices and circumstances that had led him to this moment. He had lost his job as a marketing manager 6 weeks ago when his company downsized. The severance package had been minimal, barely enough to cover 2 months of rent and expenses. He had thought he would find new work quickly. He had excellent references, a strong resume, years of experience. But the job market had been tougher than expected. Interviews led nowhere. Promising leads dried up. And then his insurance coverage had lapsed because he couldn't afford the COBRA payments, and then Emma had been hit by a drunk driver while walking home from her friend's house, and suddenly every mistake and misfortune had compounded into this crisis. He thought about how he had felt just 2 hours ago, sitting in this same chair, believing he had exhausted every option. He thought about the darkness that had crept into his mind, the terrible thoughts about what would happen if Emma died, if he lost the only family he had left. He thought about how close he had come to giving up, to accepting that he was powerless and alone and that the universe was fundamentally indifferent to his suffering. And then David Nguyen had appeared, like something from a story, like an angel in a faded jacket carrying coffee. Marcus didn't believe in divine intervention, didn't think God sent messengers to hospital waiting rooms. But he believed in human goodness now in a way he hadn't before. He believed that people could choose to be kind for no reason other than having been shown kindness themselves. He believed that connection between strangers could be as real and powerful as any family bond, maybe more so because it was chosen rather than inherited. At 1:45 in the morning, Dr. Patel emerged through the double doors still wearing her surgical scrubs. Her face was tired but smiling. Emma had come through the surgery beautifully. The internal injuries had been repaired successfully. There would be a recovery period, physical therapy, follow-up appointments, but the prognosis was excellent. Emma was young and strong. She would heal. She would be fine. Marcus broke down completely then, sobbing in relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. Dr. Patel put a hand on his shoulder and let him cry, understanding that these tears needed to come out, that holding them back would only cause more damage. When Marcus finally regained control, he thanked her repeatedly, his voice hoarse and broken. She smiled and told him he could see Emma in about an hour, once she was moved to recovery. Then she disappeared back through the doors, off to save someone else's child, to perform another miracle in a place where miracles happened every day. 3 years later, Marcus sat in a different hospital waiting room in a different city, watching a young woman pace back and forth near the windows. Her name was Jennifer Torres, and he had been observing her for the past 20 minutes. She was on her phone, calling person after person, her voice rising in desperation with each conversation. Marcus recognized that desperation. He had lived it. He knew exactly what it felt like to beg for help from people who wouldn't or couldn't provide it. Marcus's life had changed dramatically since that night with Emma. He had found a new job 3 months after her surgery, a better position than the one he had lost. He had worked his way up quickly, earning promotions and raises. He had rebuilt his savings, paid off his debts, and established himself as someone reliable and competent. Emma was now 10 years old, healthy and happy, still telling terrible jokes and still determined to become a veterinarian. She remembered almost nothing of the accident or the surgery, which Marcus considered a blessing. But Marcus remembered everything. He remembered sitting in that waiting room feeling utterly alone. He remembered David Nguyen and the envelope and the promise he had made. For 3 years, he had been watching and waiting for the right moment, the right person. He had kept money set aside specifically for this purpose, a fund he called his forward fund in his mind. He had visited hospitals occasionally, listening for situations like his own, situations where someone needed help that no one was willing to give. Jennifer ended another call, and Marcus saw her lean against the wall, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He stood up and approached her, carrying 2 cups of coffee he had just purchased from the cafeteria. She looked up at him with red eyes, weary and exhausted. "You look like you could use this," Marcus said, extending one of the cups. The words were the same ones David had used with him. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. Jennifer accepted the coffee with a mumbled thanks but didn't sit. She seemed coiled tight, ready to bolt at any moment. Marcus sat down and waited, giving her space. Eventually, she sat down too, leaving one empty chair between them for courtesy. "I couldn't help but overhear some of your calls," Marcus said carefully. "Your mother needs surgery." Jennifer stiffened but didn't deny it. Her mother had suffered a stroke and required an emergency operation that her insurance was refusing to cover due to a pre-existing condition clause. The bill was $23,000. Jennifer was a graduate student with no savings and no way to raise that kind of money quickly. Marcus told her his story. He told her about Emma and the accident and the desperate phone calls to family members who wouldn't help. He told her about David Nguyen and the envelope and the promise he had made that night. He watched Jennifer's expression change as he spoke, watched disbelief give way to fragile hope. When he finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. It was heavier than the one David had given him. $25,000, enough to cover the surgery and any complications. Jennifer stared at the envelope like it might vanish if she reached for it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know if I'm a good person or if I deserve help." The same questions Marcus had asked, the same doubts and suspicions born from a world that had taught her to expect rejection rather than kindness. "A stranger helped me once when no one else would," Marcus said. "He asked me to pass it forward when I could. So that's what I'm doing. I'm passing it forward to you." He explained the terms, or rather the lack of terms. No repayment, no interest, no strings attached. Just a promise that someday, when Jennifer was stable and secure and had more than she needed, she would find someone else who was sitting in a waiting room facing an impossible situation. She would help that person the way Marcus was helping her now. Jennifer took the envelope with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "I promise," she said. "I swear I will pass this forward. I'll find someone. I'll help them. I won't let this chain end with me." Marcus nodded, satisfied. He had kept his promise to David. He had honored the gift he had been given. The weight of it lifted from his shoulders, replaced by something lighter and warmer. He thought about that mysterious woman who had started this chain by helping David's son 4 years before Marcus had even needed help. He wondered how many people she had helped in her lifetime, how many chains of kindness she had set in motion. He would never know her name or her story, but he was connected to her through David and now through Jennifer. They were all linked by this invisible thread of chosen compassion, strangers bound together by deliberate grace. Marcus gave Jennifer his card and told her she could call if there were complications, though he suspected she wouldn't. The beauty of this system was its simplicity. Help was given freely, and then the helper disappeared, becoming a story rather than a person owed debt. It freed both parties to move forward without the complicated weight of obligation changing the nature of what had happened. As Marcus walked out of the hospital that night, he thought about Emma waiting for him at home, probably asleep by now with a book on her chest and her lamp still on. He thought about all the ordinary moments they had shared since that terrible night 3 years ago. Birthday parties and school plays and arguments about homework and lazy Sunday mornings. He thought about how easily he could have lost all of that, how close he had come to a completely different life. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Just 3 words, "Love you, Dad." He smiled and typed back the same words. The night air was cool and clear, and the city lights spread out before him like stars fallen to earth. Marcus felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes from keeping a promise that matters. He had been saved by a stranger, and now he had saved a stranger. The debt was paid, not to the person who had given but to someone new, someone who would carry the chain forward into an unknown future. Somewhere in this city, David Nguyen was living his life, probably unaware that Marcus had finally fulfilled his promise. Somewhere else, that mysterious woman who had started it all was going about her days, never knowing the ripple effects of her single act of kindness. And now Jennifer Torres would recover her mother and rebuild her life and someday find her own stranger to help. The chain would continue, link after link, stranger after stranger, each person choosing connection over indifference. Marcus drove home through the quiet streets, thinking about the mathematics of kindness, how one act multiplied across time and space created something larger than any individual could build alone. He thought about how family had failed him when he needed them most, but a stranger had proven that family was something you could choose, something you could create through deliberate acts of grace. He thought about the future, about all the people who would be helped by this expanding chain, people he would never meet but who would be touched by the same kindness that had saved his daughter's life. When he arrived home, Marcus checked on Emma before going to bed. She was indeed asleep with a book on her chest and her lamp still on, exactly as he had imagined. He carefully removed the book and turned off the light, then stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. This was what David Nguyen had given him, what that unknown woman had ultimately given him through the chain she had started. Not just money. Not just surgery. But this moment, this ordinary precious moment of watching his daughter sleep peacefully. All the ordinary moments that added up to a life. Marcus whispered a thank you into the darkness, not sure who it was meant for. Maybe David. Maybe the mystery woman. Maybe Jennifer, who would someday pass this forward to someone else. Maybe the universe itself, for arranging circumstances so that strangers could save each other. Then he went to his own room and slept deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who had kept their word and paid their debt to the future. The chain continued. It always would. That was the promise, the covenant, the sacred trust passed from stranger to stranger in hospital waiting rooms and other desperate places. As long as people chose kindness, as long as they remembered being saved and chose to save others in turn, the chain would never break. It would stretch across time and space, connecting people who would never meet, building a network of grace that no individual could create alone. This was the answer to the question Marcus had asked that terrible night: where was family when you needed them? The answer was that family could be found anywhere, in the face of a stranger with an envelope and a promise. Family was something you chose to become, something you created through action rather than inheriting through blood. And that chosen family, that network of strangers helping strangers, was sometimes stronger and more reliable than any biological connection. Marcus had expected help from family. Instead, a stranger had shown up. And that stranger had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that kindness wasn't a closed circuit between people who knew each other, but an open current that flowed through the world looking for people willing to be conductors. All you had to do was be willing to pass it forward when your turn came. All you had to do was remember being saved and choose to save someone else. The story of Marcus Chen and Emma and David Nguyen and the mystery woman and Jennifer Torres was just one thread in an enormous tapestry of human connection. But it was their thread, their story, their link in an unbreakable chain. And that was enough. That was everything.